At the most expensive restaurant in Millbrook Falls, a man in a $1,000 suit sat alone at a table set for 20, staring at his phone as the clock struck 7 p.m. on his 65th birthday. The champagne bubbles had gone flat, the candles had burned low, and not a single person had walked through those doors for him. If you enjoy stories about unexpected connections and the true meaning of wealth, feel free to subscribe. It really helps the channel. By the way, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? None of them knew that a small wrapped package sitting behind the counter would soon teach him what money could never buy. Harold Westfield III adjusted his silk tie for the third time, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he checked his Rolex again. Sterling's fine dining buzzed with evening customers, but table 12 remained an island of loneliness in a sea of conversation and laughter. The crystal glasses caught the candlelight, each one a reminder of someone who hadn't come. His ex-wife Margaret was probably sipping cocktails in Nassau. His son Marcus had sent a text that morning. "Sorry, Dad, big presentation tomorrow." 20 business associates had received invitations 3 weeks ago. None had bothered to respond. Patricia Williams, the restaurant manager, approached with practiced concern etched across her face. "Mr. Westfield, perhaps we could move you to one of our smaller tables. Something more intimate?" Her voice carried the gentle suggestion of someone trying to spare a customer further embarrassment. Harold's jaw tightened. "They're coming. Traffic is probably heavy." But even as he spoke, his phone remained silent. No missed calls, no apologetic messages. Nothing. From across the dining room, Emma Chen balanced 3 plates on one arm while refilling water glasses with the other. At 28, she had perfected the art of invisible service, moving through the restaurant like a ghost who anticipated every need. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her uniform shoes, worn thin at the heels, made soft whispers against the marble floor. She couldn't help but notice the man at table 12. She had watched him check his phone dozens of times, seen him straighten his shoulders each time the front door opened, only to slump when the newcomer was seated elsewhere. When she overheard his phone call to someone named Marcus, her heart clenched with recognition. "It's just dinner, Marcus. I know we haven't talked much lately, but it's my birthday." Harold's voice carried despite his attempt at privacy. "Please, just an hour." Emma pretended to polish a nearby wine glass, watching Harold's face crumble as he listened to whatever excuse was being offered on the other end. When he finally hung up, his shoulders sagged like a man who had just lost his last battle. Something stirred in Emma's chest, a familiar ache she remembered from her own lonely evenings after David's funeral. Before she could second-guess herself, she walked to his table. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "I couldn't help but notice it's your birthday." Harold looked up, suspicion flickering in his gray eyes. People didn't approach Harold Westfield unless they wanted something. "I thought you might enjoy some chocolate cake. On the house." Harold studied her face, searching for the angle, the hidden motive. "What do you want?" Emma's smile faltered. "Nothing, sir. Just, everyone deserves cake on their birthday." She set the small plate down, complete with a single candle. "Would you mind if I sat for just a moment? My break just started." Against every instinct honed by decades of people seeking his wealth, Harold nodded toward the empty chair across from him. Emma sat carefully, as if she might flee at any moment. "What did you wish for?" she asked, nodding toward the unlit candle. Harold found himself answering honestly for the first time in years. "For someone to remember I exist." Emma's expression softened. I understand that feeling. I moved to Millbrook Falls 2 years ago after my husband passed. Didn't know a soul." She paused, watching Harold's face change. Sometimes the hardest part isn't being alone. It's feeling forgotten. Harold felt something crack inside his chest. A wall he'd built so high he'd forgotten it was there. "Your husband. How did he?" "Car accident. One moment we're planning our future, the next." Emma's voice trailed off. She straightened her shoulders. "But you learn to keep going. You have to." As Emma returned to work, Harold found himself watching her move through the restaurant with quiet efficiency. He caught Patricia's attention and asked quietly, "Tell me about her." "The waitress who brought the cake." Patricia glanced toward Emma, then leaned closer. "Emma Chen. Sweetest person you'll ever meet. Works double shifts here and at the morning diner downtown. Has an 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. Never complains, never asks for help, even though—" She paused, shaking her head. "Even though what?" "She's been working extra shifts for months, trying to save enough for Sophie's Christmas present. Just wants to buy her daughter a bicycle." Patricia's voice dropped lower. "Between you and me, I don't think she's been eating much herself. Always says she's not hungry when I offer her the staff meal." Harold watched Emma deliver food to a table of teenagers, her smile genuine despite her obvious exhaustion. When she bent to retrieve a dropped napkin, he noticed the worn soles of her shoes, the careful way she moved to hide her fatigue. Meanwhile, Emma wiped down tables near the kitchen, telling her co-worker Maria about the encounter. "There's something about him, you know? Reminds me of my dad before he died. Successful on the outside, but so alone. Rich men are all the same," Maria warned, loading dirty dishes. "They think money fixes everything." Emma shook her head. This felt different. When he said he wanted someone to remember he exists, I saw real pain in his eyes. Harold prepared to leave, pulling out his wallet to calculate a tip. He started to leave his usual 20%, then thought about what Patricia had said about Emma not eating, about the bicycle for Sophie. His hand hovered over the bills as he calculated what would actually make a difference in their lives. But as he reached for his money, Emma's voice carried from near the kitchen phone. "Please, Mr. Davidson, I just need 2 more weeks. Sophie and I will be out by Christmas if you need us to be. But the rent, I'm working as many shifts as I can." Harold's hand froze. He listened to Emma's quiet desperation as she pleaded with her landlord, promising money she clearly didn't have. When she hung up, her shoulders shook once before she composed herself and returned to work. Harold stared at the cash in his hand, then at Emma serving other tables with the same warm smile she'd given him, despite carrying a weight that would crush most people. He put the money away without leaving it, his mind racing with a plan that would either help her or destroy whatever fragile connection they'd begun to build. The next morning, Emma climbed the narrow stairs to her second-floor apartment, exhaustion weighing down every step. The hallway smelled of old cooking oil and disappointment, but when she reached her door, her landlord, Mr. Davidson, stood waiting with an expression she'd never seen before, something almost resembling kindness. "Emma, good news," he said, holding up a receipt. "Your rent's been paid. Full month, plus the late fees." Emma stared at the paper, her heart hammering. "I don't understand. By who?" "Anonymous donor. Came by this morning with cash. Said they wanted to help a hard-working single mother." Davidson shrugged. "Whoever it was knew your situation pretty well." Emma's mind raced back to the restaurant, to the sad man at table 12 who'd watched her with such careful attention. The timing felt too convenient to be coincidence. When she arrived at Sterling's that evening, she approached Harold's usual table with a mixture of gratitude and wounded pride. "Sir, I wanted to thank you," she began carefully. "If you were the one who helped with my rent." Harold looked up from his newspaper, his expression genuinely puzzled. "I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about." But something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt perhaps, told a different story. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Of course. I must have been mistaken." She turned to leave, but Harold's voice stopped her. "Wait. Emma, isn't it?" He gestured to the empty chair. "Please, sit. I'd like to hear about your daughter." But Emma's pride had been wounded. She saw the pity in his eyes, the way wealthy people looked at her when they decided she needed saving. "I need to get back to work," she said stiffly and walked away, leaving Harold staring after her with confusion and regret. At the kitchen pass, Maria cornered Emma with knowing eyes. "Let me guess. Rich man thinks his money solved all your problems." "I don't want to talk about it," Emma muttered, but Maria wasn't finished. "Listen to me, girl. Rich men like that, they always want something in return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually the bill comes due. Trust me on this." The seeds of doubt that Maria planted grew through Emma's shift. Every time Harold tried to catch her eye, she looked away. When he attempted to speak to her again, she assigned another waitress to his table. By the time her shift ended, Harold had left without saying goodbye, and Emma felt both relieved and strangely empty. The next morning at Millbrook Diner, Emma's second job, she was refilling coffee cups when she heard the bell above the door chime. She looked up to see Harold Westfield walking in, looking completely out of place among the truckers and factory workers who made up the diner's usual clientele. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked, approaching his booth with reluctant steps. "I wanted to explain about yesterday," Harold said. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Emma's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "No misunderstanding. You felt sorry for the poor waitress and decided to play hero. Well, I don't need your charity." The diner grew quiet, conversations stopping as other customers turned to watch the drama unfolding. Emma realized too late that everyone was staring, but her embarrassment only fueled her anger. "I work 2 jobs, I take care of my daughter, and I pay my own way," she continued, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent diner. "I don't need some rich man thinking he can buy his way into feeling good about himself." Sal Murphy, the diner owner, appeared beside their booth. "Emma, maybe you should take a break. And sir," he turned to Harold, "I think it's time for you to leave." Harold stood slowly, his face red with humiliation. Every eye in the diner followed him as he walked to the door, the bell jingling his defeat. Emma watched him go, suddenly feeling sick about the scene she'd caused. "Way to go, Em," called out Betty Morrison from the corner booth, the town's biggest gossip. "About time someone put these rich creeps in their place." But Emma felt no satisfaction, only a growing certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. The way Harold's shoulders had sagged, the genuine hurt in his eyes, it reminded her too much of her father when people assumed the worst about his intentions. By afternoon, Betty Morrison had spread the story across half of Millbrook Falls. At Emma's daughter's school, other parents whispered and pointed when Emma arrived for pickup. The story had transformed in the telling. Now Harold was some kind of predator, pursuing innocent young mothers for unclear but certainly sinister purposes. Emma arrived at Millbrook Elementary to find her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, bouncing with excitement by the school gates. "Mommy, guess what?" Sophie's backpack looked unusually full. "Someone paid for my field trip to the Science Museum, and Mrs. Collins said I got new art supplies, too." Emma's stomach dropped. "Who, sweetheart? Who paid for these things?" "I don't know. Mrs. Collins said it was anonymous, which means secret." Sophie pulled out brand new colored pencils and sketch pads. "Look how pretty they are." Emma's mind flashed to Harold's confused expression the night before, his genuine denial about the rent. If he hadn't paid her rent, but had done this. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She'd humiliated him publicly for something he hadn't done, while he'd been quietly helping Sophie. "We need to return these," Emma said quietly. "But Mommy, why?" "Mrs. Collins said it's okay to keep them." Emma knelt down to Sophie's level. "Sometimes people try to help, but we need to stand on our own feet, remember?" But even as she said it, Emma wasn't sure she believed it anymore. The art supplies would mean so much to Sophie, who loved to draw, but had been making do with broken crayons and paper from Emma's work. How much pride was too much when it came to her daughter's happiness? That evening, Emma stormed into the glass tower that housed Westfield Technologies, determined to confront Harold and return Sophie's gifts. But the security guard at the front desk looked at her like she was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "Mr. Westfield doesn't see people without appointments," the guard said dismissively. "Tell him Emma Chen is here. He'll know who I am." The guard made a show of picking up the phone, but Emma could tell he wasn't actually calling anyone. "Sorry, he's unavailable. You can try calling his office during business hours." Emma left the building feeling smaller than when she'd entered. Outside, she called the main number and was transferred 3 times before reaching Harold's assistant, a crisp-voiced woman named Jennifer. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Westfield has given strict instructions that he's not to be disturbed by anyone from Millbrook Falls," Jennifer said. Apparently, there was some kind of incident. Emma hung up, realizing that her public scene at the diner had destroyed any chance of making things right. Worse, she was starting to understand that Harold might have been telling the truth about the rent, and her accusations had wounded an innocent man who'd only been trying to help. Meanwhile, across town, Harold sat in his assistant's office learning just how badly their encounter had been misinterpreted by the local gossip network. "Sir, I think you should know what people are saying," Jennifer said carefully. "There are rumors about you bothering a young waitress. Some people are calling you a predator." Harold felt the last of his hopes crumble. He'd spent the day after the diner incident walking through Millbrook Falls, seeing his hometown through Emma's eyes. He'd noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. The way people struggled to make ends meet, the dignity they maintained despite their hardships. Emma had awakened something in him that had been sleeping for years. "Pack my things, Jennifer. I'm going back to California." "Sir, are you sure? What about the foundation work you wanted to start here?" Harold looked out the window at the town where he'd been born, where he'd built his empire, and where he'd finally found someone who'd made him remember what it felt like to be human. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. But before leaving, Harold wrote a letter. He wrote about his childhood in Millbrook Falls, about building his company and losing his family in the process. He wrote about his son Marcus, who hadn't spoken to him in 3 years after Harold missed his wedding for a board meeting. He wrote about the loneliness that money couldn't cure and the way Emma's simple kindness had reminded him of who he used to be before success made him forget how to connect with people. He included a photo from his wallet, himself as a young father, holding a toddler with Emma's eyes and smile. The letter explained everything he couldn't say in person, every good intention that had been misunderstood, every moment of genuine care that had been mistaken for manipulation. Harold sealed the letter and left it with Jennifer, along with instructions to deliver it to Emma only after he'd left town. Then he packed his bags and prepared to return to his empty mansion in California, convinced that some kinds of damage could never be repaired. As his car pulled away from Millbrook Falls, Harold didn't see Emma running down the street toward his office building, still clutching Sophie's art supplies and finally ready to listen to what he'd been trying to tell her all along. 2 days later, Emma found Harold's letter slipped under her apartment door. Her hands trembled as she read his story, how he'd built his empire but lost his family in the process, how his son Marcus refused to speak to him after years of Harold choosing boardrooms over birthdays, business trips over baseball games. The letter painted a picture of a man who had everything money could buy but had forgotten how to buy the things that truly mattered. But it was the photograph tucked inside the letter that made Emma's world tilt on its axis. A younger Harold held a toddler with familiar dark hair and bright eyes exactly like her late husband David's. Emma stared at the photo until her vision blurred, memories flooding back of David's stories about his wealthy father who had abandoned him, who had chosen success over his son's childhood. Emma's hands shook as she reached for her phone and dialed her late husband's Aunt Margaret, the only family connection David had maintained. "Margaret, it's Emma. I need to ask you something about David's father." Emma's voice cracked. His last name, was it Westfield? The silence on the other end stretched like an eternity before Margaret's quiet voice confirmed Emma's worst fears. "Harold Westfield III. David tried to reconcile with him about 10 years ago, right after you two got married. He wanted his father to know about you, about the life he was building." Emma sank into her kitchen chair. "What happened?" "Harold's assistant turned David away, said Mr. Westfield had no interest in gold diggers or their children. David never tried again." Margaret's voice grew soft. "Emma, why are you asking about this now?" Emma stared at the photo of Harold holding David as a toddler, the same gentle expression she'd seen on his face when he'd given her the birthday cake. "Because I think I just destroyed the only chance Sophie will ever have to know her grandfather." That night, Emma sat on Sophie's bed, watching her daughter color with the art supplies Harold had bought. Sophie hummed softly as she drew, completely unaware that the man who'd given her these gifts was the same person in the old photograph Emma now kept hidden in her pocket. "Sophie, sweetheart, what would you say if I told you that you had a grandfather you'd never met?" Sophie looked up, crayon poised in midair. "Like the grandfather in my storybooks? The one who gives hugs and tells stories?" "Maybe. But this grandfather, he made some mistakes when your daddy was little. He forgot how to show love." Sophie considered this with the seriousness only children could muster. "Did he say sorry?" "He tried to, but I didn't listen very well." Emma brushed Sophie's hair back from her face. Sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be. Emma called Harold's office repeatedly over the next 3 days, but Jennifer's responses grew increasingly cold. "Mr. Westfield has made it clear he doesn't wish to be contacted by anyone from Millbrook Falls," she repeated like a mantra. On the 4th day, Emma's call was answered by a different voice, a man who identified himself as Harold's lawyer, Robert Chen. No relation, despite the shared surname. I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Westfield was involved in a car accident on his way to Los Angeles, the lawyer said. He's stable but hospitalized. Before you ask, he specifically requested that no one from Connecticut be notified, but… The lawyer paused. He's been asking for someone named Emma, and he keeps mentioning a granddaughter named Sophie. Emma's world stopped spinning. He knows. He figured it out. Ma'am, I think there's something you should know. Mr. Westfield has been carrying your business card from the restaurant in his wallet. When the paramedics brought him in, it was the only emergency contact they could find. Emma closed her eyes, imagining Harold alone in a hospital bed 3,000 miles away, surrounded by strangers and calling out for the family he'd just discovered and lost in the same week. Which hospital? Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. But ma'am, he specifically asked that no one from his past be contacted. Emma looked at Sophie, who was drawing a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Sometimes people ask for things that aren't good for them, Emma said. Can you tell me his room number? That evening, Emma counted the money in her emergency fund. Barely enough for 2 plane tickets to California. It meant no Christmas presents, no new winter coats, no safety net if something went wrong. But as she watched Sophie add more details to her drawing, Emma knew there was only one choice she could live with. Sophie, how would you like to take an airplane ride? To see Grandpa Harold? Sophie asked with the intuitive wisdom that sometimes surprised Emma. You know about Grandpa Harold? Sophie held up her drawing. 3 stick figures labeled Mommy, Sophie, and Grandpa Harold. I've been drawing him since you showed me Daddy's picture. They have the same eyes. 24 hours later, Emma and Sophie stood outside Harold's hospital room at Cedars-Sinai. Through the partially open door, Emma could hear Harold's voice, weak but determined, talking to someone on the phone. I don't care what the legal complications are, Robert. I want everything to go to David's wife and daughter. They're my family now. The only family that matters. Harold's voice cracked slightly. I failed my son, but maybe I can do right by his daughter. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Sophie tugged at her sleeve. Why are you crying, Mommy? Before Emma could answer, footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor. A tall man in an expensive suit approached with determined strides, and Emma recognized the face immediately from David's old photographs. This was Marcus, Harold's son, older now but still carrying David's same stubborn jawline. Excuse me, Marcus said coldly, looking Emma up and down. I don't know who you are, but visiting hours are over. My father doesn't need any more people trying to take advantage of his condition. Emma straightened her shoulders. I'm Emma Chen. This is Sophie, your niece. Marcus's expression shifted from suspicion to outright hostility. So, you're the gold digger who's been harassing my father. Security told me about your calls. Marcus, Emma said quietly, your father isn't being taken advantage of. He's trying to build the family he lost when he chose business over everything else. Don't lecture me about my father, Marcus snapped. I know exactly who he is. From inside the room, Harold's weak voice called out, Marcus, is that you? Marcus's face softened for just a moment before hardening again. I'm here, Dad, and I'm making sure these people don't bother you anymore. Emma felt 8-year-old Sophie slip her small hand into hers. Mommy, is that man angry because he misses his daddy too? The simple question hung in the air like a bridge between 2 broken families. Marcus stared down at Sophie, and for the first time, Emma saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "Sophie," Emma said gently, "why don't you show Marcus your drawing?" Sophie pulled the crumpled paper from her pocket, the 3 stick figures holding hands. "I drew our family. Mommy says families can be bigger than just 2 people." Marcus stared at the drawing, his composure finally cracking. "Your daddy? What was his name?" "David Chen. But Mommy says his first name used to be David Westfield, before he changed it." Marcus sank into the nearest chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "David. My little brother David." He looked up at Emma with new understanding. "He tried to contact us years ago. Dad's assistant said that he wasn't interested in gold diggers or their children." Emma finished. "I know. David told me." From Harold's room came the sound of something falling, followed by a weak call for help. Marcus and Emma rushed in together to find Harold struggling to sit up, his face pale but his eyes bright with hope as he saw Sophie. "Is this?" Harold's voice was barely a whisper. Sophie walked to his bedside with the fearless confidence of childhood. "Hi, Grandpa Harold. I'm Sophie. I brought you a drawing." Harold's weathered hands shook as he accepted the crumpled paper. When he saw the 3 connected figures, tears began streaming down his face. "David would be so proud of you, sweetheart." Emma approached the bed slowly. "Harold, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I was so afraid of being seen as someone who needed rescuing that I couldn't see you were just trying to be kind." "No," Harold said, reaching for her hand. "I'm the one who should apologize. I spent so many years thinking money could fix relationships that I forgot how to just be present." Marcus stood in the doorway, watching his father hold his granddaughter's hand while she chattered about her drawings and her school and her dreams of having a bicycle for Christmas. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "I think we have a lot to talk about." 1 month later, Harold sat in the front row of Millbrook Elementary School's Christmas pageant, wearing a simple cardigan instead of his usual tailored suits. Sophie stood on stage wearing angel wings that Harold had quietly helped Emma afford, her voice clear and strong as she sang about peace on earth and goodwill toward all. Emma sat beside Harold, their hands clasped as they watched Sophie perform. Around them, other families filled the small auditorium with warmth and laughter, but Emma felt like she and Harold existed in their own perfect bubble of healing. "David would be proud," Harold whispered, and Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Marcus had returned to his life in Seattle, but not before spending a week in Millbrook Falls, learning to know his father again and helping Harold find a small house near Emma and Sophie instead of the mansion that had been his prison for so many years. After the pageant, the 3 of them walked home through the first snowfall of winter. Sophie ran ahead, trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue, while Harold and Emma followed at a slower pace. "You know," Harold said, watching Sophie spin in circles, "I used to think wealth meant having enough money to buy anything you wanted." "And now?" Emma asked. Harold smiled as Sophie called for him to watch her make snow angels. "Now I know it means having people who want to spend time with you even when you can't buy them anything." Sophie ran back to them, her cheeks red with cold and joy. "Grandpa Harold, will you carry me? My legs are tired from being an angel." Harold lifted his granddaughter onto his shoulders, and as they walked through the falling snow toward home, Emma knew they had found something worth more than all the money in the world. They had found their way back to being a family.